Hey guys, we're back out at Shiloh National Military Park today, down by the Tennessee River, where I'm going to start trying to show you Grant's last line of defense here at Shiloh. And dare I say, this last line of defense formed in the shape of a fishhook. Gettysburg's fishhook has nothing on this one. Using a lot of high-level technology, we're going to start the day around where the marker is now, and we're going to move up and around Grant's last line of defense. Confederate General Albert Sidney Johnston wanted to find the Union left flank and move the army toward Owl Creek Bottom. My marker is moving out toward Owl Creek Bottom now. See, General Johnston knew that if he were not able to turn the Union left flank, that they would simply back up into a really small area and form an almost impenetrable line. The USS Lexington and the USS Tyler were a pretty good barb, and the fishhook that was the Union's last line here after the first day of the Battle of Shiloh. The Union gunboats were just behind us here in the Tennessee River, firing up Deal Branch Ravine. The topography of the ravine meant that the boats were generally firing in the flank and the rear of Chalmers' Confederates as they attempted to cross. These few Confederate brigades that made it over here to Deal Branch Ravine had been fighting all day, but they were still the only ones that were able to mount any kind of attack on Grant's last line. Chalmers' Mississippians were on the extreme Confederate right, with Jackson next and 2 regiments from Gladden's brigade. Then Anderson's guys came next. Gladden and Anderson's men had to cross 2 major ravines because of a split in the creek. All these Confederate soldiers crossed Deal Branch Ravine, which was filled with water and terribly difficult to navigate on a dry day. These Confederates had been fighting since about 5 o'clock that morning and were largely out of ammunition. As we walk up to Powell's battery here, think about how they would have been in that wood line crossing Deal Branch Ravine, somewhere straight out in front of you now. Chalmers and Jackson made the only real attempt to storm this Union last line of defense between here and Mann's battery that we'll see here in just a sec. The woods were much more open at the time of the battle, and so when Confederate soldiers started poking their heads up over the top of the ravine, Union guys started firing shells from all this artillery that you're looking at. Generally, the men from Anderson's and what was left of Gladden's brigades filed down into Deal Branch Ravine to take cover from the fire. Shells from this artillery passed over the ravine and the Confederates' heads, but even Jackson said his men could not be urged forward without support. One group of Confederates even made a rapid retreat and went back to the last Federal camp that they had taken. Chalmers' Mississippians had been fighting around 13 hours and had marched over 6 miles, but they were the last men standing. They had come over and through all kinds of difficult terrain, but Chalmers' Mississippians were going to try to break Grant's last line. Chalmers' men were right out here in these woods just in front of that last artillery piece, attempting to form a line that would break the Federals and turn their left. I'm taking you out to Chalmers' position to attempt to show you just how close they were. Chalmers said that the fire he took from his right, which is going to be to your left right now, was the heaviest fire that he saw during this whole engagement. This fire was coming from the gunboats on the river and the artillery pieces that you've gone by. These Confederates slid down one side of Deal Branch Ravine and trudged through the boggy bottom and climbed nearly 100 feet to the spot that you're about to see. Once these Confederates trudged through the ravine and stuck their head up over the top of the hill, then a big portion of almost 50 Union artillery pieces opened up on them. A private in the 50th Illinois confirms that as soon as the Confederates reached the top of the hill, the Union batteries opened up on them. He said, "Such cannonading I never heard before. It completely checked the rebels." Stanford's Mississippi battery set up on the south side of Deal Branch Ravine, but they had to wait for Chalmers Mississippians to get out of the way so they could establish a counter battery fire. And as he was waiting for Chalmers' men to get out of the way, he decided to withhold his fire for fear of the gunboats in the river. The gunboats were just a few hundred yards to our right, would see the flash of Thomas's guns, and of course nowhere to fire. This Confederate attack lasted about 20 to 30 minutes and of course was repulsed. There was a whole lot of Union artillery and infantry just not too far ahead. Up here close to the landing was mostly artillery, but as we began to move away from the landing, you can see a Union infantry marker ahead of you, and the line began to be interspersed with infantrymen in amongst the artillery. Around the time of Chalmers' assault, the Confederate General Beauregard issued an order that all fighting would be stopped for the night. Well, of course, in post-war years, Confederate General Braxton Bragg would say that he and his men were on the verge of a great Confederate victory when Beauregard's order called them back. Bragg said the fire from the gunboats was harmless and one more assault would crush Grant. Bragg said that when he received the halt order that he became angry and expressed this to his superiors, but now Bragg didn't mention any of this in a letter to his wife a couple days after the battle. Perhaps his memory changed over the years. I need you guys to remember that Shiloh was a big old Union camp. This place was designed to train the United States Army for a siege on Corinth. These siege guns in front of you are trained down into an area of the battlefield that they thought it was most likely the Confederates would come up. You see, the United States Army really thought that they had time to come here to Pittsburgh Landing and learn how to be a fighting army and move out and set up siege and attack Confederates at Corinth. Yes, you're still traveling along the Union Fishhook line of defense on the battlefield here at Shiloh to one of, I think, the more special places along this last line. You are looking at the only earthworks created by the Union Army before the Battle of Shiloh. There were places on the battlefield where hay bales were stacked around guns or some other kind of makeshift abattis, we'll call it, but this was the only place where Union soldiers dug out shovels and built something. The United States Army knew Confederates were in the area, but once again, they were here to train. They really just had no idea the Confederates would attack. The Union Army thought the Confederates would stay in Corinth, so they were out here training to invade it. McClernand's division fell back to this spot in the last line, and about the time that Chalmers' guys attacked on the other side of the line, McClernand's division simply just melted away. To their credit, though, they were rallied and brought back to the fight. This is a spot on the old Hamburg-Savannah Road, and behind us, well, we're backing out toward Owl Creek Bottom. Now, this part of the Union Fishhook was made up of mostly infantry. See, they were trying to keep this road open so Lew Wallace could bring his division in to the fight. Most of the Confederates from this part of the battlefield had gone toward the fighting in the Union Center or the Hornet's Nest. And if you haven't guessed it already, I just don't believe that the Confederates ever would have broken Grant's last line here, even if Beauregard didn't issue that stop order. There was just way too much infantry and artillery massed into a relatively small space for the Confederates, who were left here fighting at the end of the first day of the Battle of Shiloh, to ever break Grant's last line. We're going to move on out to Owl Creek Bottom, and you're looking at the United States Cavalry marker. I need you to please leave us a comment on your thoughts about where the Confederates going to break the line or not. This old bridge marks the spot where Lew Wallace and his men crossed the creek. Of course, this is not a wartime bridge. It was built sometime in the early 1900s. Hey, if you guys have made it this long, I need you to bump that like button, share this video, and pass it along to your friends. But I sure do hope you've enjoyed visiting the battlefield at Shiloh today. Thank you.